Welcome to episode number 90 of Off the Shelf. This is part 2 of our interview with Charles Paisley. Charles was born into the message and grew up in Faith Assembly Church in Clarksville, Indiana, where Junior Jackson was the pastor. Charles is currently a minister at the Gospel Church of Jeffersonville, Indiana, where he is working with other former message believers to help people find community and support as they leave the message. What caused you to start asking questions about the message? And I know these things, certainly with me, it's not suddenly you woke up and say, oh, the message false. You got a question, right, and you have a difficult time getting answers to the questions, and you talk to people and they don't want you to question. So what started your questioning the message?
So that's a little bit of a tricky question, because, you know, like I said, I sat through all these end of the world predictions, and I still believed the message. I would die for the message, right? I would have died for the message on the other side of it. I mean, the stuff that we did. I mean, it's so. You know, none of those things. Like, even when the world failed to end in 2005, it didn't even faze me, Rod. I kept going, right? Like, it didn't hardly faze me, right? Even the first thing that kind of fazed me a little bit is when we lost so much of our family in 2008. Like, and that's where that's the first time maybe I put something in my shelf, like, why did we blow everything up? Why couldn't we find an answer to this, right? But, you know, we did what we always did. The fan is in his hand, right? And this stuff was done by the will of God to run off the chaff, right? That's how we always explained it. This is the will of God to get rid of the chaff. We are here. We still believe the truth, so we're the elite or what have you. You know, we're the true bride of Christ. So I was, although lots of things happened over the years, nothing ever, for many years, never made me think there was actually anything wrong with the message itself. I was always able to do mental gymnastics to, you know, justify the message. You just thought, well, we just have this minor thing here or there wrong. But maybe let me give you the first story that maybe planted a problem that stuck with me for a little while. So there was a man who came to our church named, I'll say his name's Glenn Funk. He's passed away. He was a tabernacle deacon during the 40s and 50s. Brother Branham had appointed him. And he had 2 sons. He had more children, but 2 sons in particular that had contracted polio while William Branham was still alive. And one of them, they were both badly injured, and one was crippled as a result. And many, many times growing up and into my young adulthood, he would testify how William Branham had prayed for his boys and personally assured him that before the end came, these boys were going to be healed. And, you know, that was one of the many William Branham promises that people in our church carried. Because keep in mind, Faith Assembly was populated by half the church were families had known Brother Branham to nearly the beginning of his ministry, right? So, you know, most message churches have no witnesses of William Branham, right? But our church was majority witnesses of William Branham growing up. And so this thing that his sons was going to be healed was just one of the great promises that we look to. And so time went by, and Glenn Funk, the deacon, died, and then his sons get older, and then one day, the first real problem came. So one of his sons had divorced and remarried a younger woman, and I want to say, too, these people, they're still alive. These are wonderful people. I love these people so much. I mean, and I miss them. I really miss them, you know. The people at Faith Assembly, a lot of them are really wonderful people. But this man divorced, he remarried, and the first Sunday he comes to church with his new wife, you know, he comes in on crutches. You know, the preacher calls him and his wife out from the platform in the middle of the service. and he tells them, leave church, never come back. Because what you've done in this remarriage is such a great sin. So they're thrown out of the church, right? Which is not things like that happen. But there, as I sat there that day, right, my mind is exploding. This man was supposed to be healed. Brother Branham, had promised this. It was prophetic. And now we have just thrown him out of church, to never come back. So how is the prophecy ever going to be fulfilled, right? And so that was one of the first things that kind of planted a seed with me. And so as time went by, and that man's still living, he still hasn't been healed, but, I pray God does heal him. But that it never happened, right? And so at that point, I really thought something was wrong. And then when I got to about 2016, I started to realize that time was going to go on long enough that all the living witnesses of William Branham was going to be dead. And so I started a process of trying to collect as much message history, which I have behind me on these shelves, as I could. And through that, I interviewed most all the living people that knew William Branham in the church, started collecting testimonies, kind of privately, personally. And through that, I started, again, coming into all of these different conflicting facts, right? That's when a lot of the discrepancies really became clear to me. One really prominent one that I'd come across that troubled me a whole lot was the healing of Georgia Carter. And are you familiar with that?
It was one of the early healings.
Okay. Yeah, so she was healed in 1941, and at our church we had multiple witnesses who were there at the services when that happened. She was healed after the revival was over. But I'm sure anyone in the message will remember this story. So Brother Branham was in Jeffersonville area, and he has a vision, and in his vision he hears a sheep crying out, Milltown, Milltown. And he says, I got to go to Milltown and save a little lost sheep out there, which was George Carter. But he always said, I didn't know where Milltown was. I never even heard of it. So I had to go ask people, where's Milltown? Where's Milltown? Well, Brother Branham had been going to Milltown for years before that. And he already knew Georgia Carter and all them years before that, right? And I knew the people who were there with him years before that. And so when that happened, when I looked at that was one of the first times I realized, wait a minute, William Branham even would make up stuff about these supernatural experiences, right? So that planted a big worry in me. And this rod is before I've even found any of Believe the Sign or any of that stuff, right? And so I had these questions in my mind. And then I learned, I think the first thing I learned was the municipal bridge vision was false, right? That was a tough one to kind of get through. And I found out the old timers all knew it was false here.
But now, one of the things that people always say, well, when William Branham was alive, nobody ever told him that he was wrong.
So that's not true.
They just didn't stand up on the platform and say it. But
so I know that's not true at all, right? So Graham Snelling was his assistant pastor in the 50s. This is a well-known story here. Graham Snelling confronted him over the 1933 baptism story he told, because he had told a lot of facts about that weren't true. And we knew multiple witnesses at the 33 baptism. So Graham Snelling, his assistant pastor, confronted him in the mid-50s over the way he was telling the baptism story. And shortly after that, William Branham has visions that Graham Snelling's committing adultery, right? And Graham Snelling's thrown out and ran out of the tabernacle, right? That's the stories of things that happened to the people who did confront William
there was
Branham.
No truth to the fact that he was committing adultery.
I don't know, right? I don't know personally. All I know is that's what was handed down to me as a story, was that after he confronted him, William Branham then has this vision that he's having a committed adultery. Yeah. And so that he's definitely not the only one that's told William Branham things weren't right. There's Ernest Fandler had confronted him at one point. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but Ernest Fandler was from Saskatchewan. And so this is a wonderful story. So we believed, like I mentioned, we believed that William Branham told these stories on purpose, and God let him do it purposefully to deceive people. And we went back to Elijah and Elisha and John the Baptist, and Brother Jackson would pull out examples where they all said things that seemed to be untrue. And so he said, they were untrue. They said things that weren't true and misled people. Well, it's only natural we would expect Brother Branham to also exaggerate and say things that aren't true. So Ernest Fandler is one of the stories that fits into that. So Ernest Fandler, he was with William Branham. They were driving down the road in an old pickup truck, and Brother Branham's in the passenger seat. And Brother Branham says to Ernest Fandler, he says, "God showed you something about me, Ernest." And Ernest Fandler says, "I don't want to talk about it." And Brother Branham says again, "Now, Ernest, I want you to tell me what God said about me." And Ernest Fandler says, "I don't want to tell you, Brother Branham." And then finally Brother Branham says, "I adjure thee in the name of the Lord, tell me what God has told you to tell about me." And Ernest Fandler looks at him and says, "Brother Branham, you make a lot of stuff up."
And who did you hear this from?
Ernest Fandler shared this with us personally. And then Brother Branham says, "Well, Ernest, that's true. I have that problem. You pray for me." But so we've had these stories, it's always been known to us Brother Branham was a bad, terrible exaggerator, but we believed he did it on purpose.
To create stumbling blocks for people so that they wouldn't believe. Although, the big question I have is, so when does exaggeration turn into a lie?
So, I think, when you're out fishing, the amount of rope you give somebody is more, if it's a fishing story or something. But, when it comes to the gospel, I don't think you can't put no exaggeration in it at all. We expect exaggeration in fishing stories, but when it comes to supernatural experiences and the gospel, there cannot be any exaggerations in that. It needs to be the truth, right? And so a little leaven leavens the whole lump, right? That's how
God doesn't need our help.
No. It's good enough, right? The miracle's already exciting enough if it's a real miracle, right? The gospel's already exciting enough if it's presented the right way. You don't need to spice it up.
So we were talking earlier about, and you mentioned cognitive dissonance, and this is a concept that was postulated first as a theory by a professor of psychology by the name of Leon Festinger in a book called When Prophecy Fails. And if you haven't read the book, you should. I know you've read it, Charles. Yeah, you've got it right there. Yeah, it's a very, very good book, I think written in 1956. I just finished reading a book entitled Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Authors are Tavris and Aronson. And it deals with the whole issue of cognitive dissonance in a variety of spheres, public sphere. And for those that don't know, cognitive dissonance is it's a hardwired psychological mechanism in our brains that creates self-justification in us. And we all have it. It protects what we know is certain, our self-esteem, our tribal affiliations, the groups that we put ourselves into. We're part of various groups. Like I was in the Message for almost 40 years, and I identified with the group of people that were Message believers, and in particular, our flavor or subsect within the greater Message, we were followers of William Branham. That was who I was. It was part of my identity. And cognitive dissonance is a state of tension that occurs when a person holds two what they refer to as cognitions, which is just two ideas, two attitudes, two beliefs, two opinions that are inconsistent with each other. They disagree with each other. A good example of this is when a person tells themselves that, so there's somebody's a smoker, and a smoker says, smoking is a dumb thing to do because it could kill me. But they also smoke 2 packs a day. So they've got this problem inside of their mind, and it produces mental discomfort that ranges from minor
pangs to deep anguish. But it's to the extent that people can't rest easy until they find a way to reduce that dissonance. So in the example of a smoker, the most direct way for a smoker to reduce the dissonance is to stop smoking by quitting. But if they try to quit and fail, now they're still stuck with this dissonance. So they have to convince themselves that smoking isn't really that bad. Maybe it's worth the risk because it helps the person relax, or it prevents them from gaining weight, because after all, obesity is a health risk. And so they'd rather smoke and be thin than not smoke and be overweight. And the brain has incredible ways of creating self-delusion. It's really true in the message. Message preachers tell their congregation there's nothing in the issues on Believe the Sign or any of the other websites that exist. But when you talk to the message preachers, they've actually never looked at the issues. And they've convinced themselves that all the things that we've raised are complete nonsense because it's not possible in their worldview that William Branham was a false prophet. So with dissonance, I know each one of us has gone through it, and it's really prevalent for people still in the message because they believe the message. Therefore, they're special. They're the only ones that God has chosen, and everybody outside the message is atomic fodder. And as a result, they'll do the mental gymnastics, which you were talking about, that it takes to preserve those beliefs. How did you get through your cognitive dissonance? What was it like for you? Was there a particular issue that triggered your realization that your beliefs were wrong?
So I think it may be multiple things coming together. So I mentioned, how we had the 2005, the world didn't end. Well, it didn't stop there. So we had new dates, and then new dates, and new dates, and new dates. And, in 2015, the Shemitah was supposed to be the sign of the end, right? The end didn't come. 2016, the Jubilee was supposed to be the sign of the end. The end didn't come. Every year or two, they were coming up with a new sign that was the sign of the end. And at a certain point, there was just too many too fast for me. And so I start wondering, I start not necessarily to question the message at that point, but to question the credibility of the ministers telling me this stuff. I started having the problem there first. But then as I had those questions in my mind, that's when I stumbled onto the things that I couldn't explain away anymore. And for me, that's the stuff around 1963. So in our part of the message, and I don't know if it's this way in every part, but for my part, for sure, 1963 and what happened that year is so pivotal. It's almost everything to us. We believe that when the Lord descended from heaven with a shout, with the cloud coming down, we thought that was the fulfillment, of that verse in Thessalonians, the Lord descended from heaven with a shout. And Brother Branham having that experience and coming back and preaching the 7 seals, we believed he preached the first seal, the first 6, but he didn't have number 7. And so we believe that was a new divine revelation from God, and we believe that revelation, that knowledge, is what then made us the special bride of Christ. We had this special thing that nobody else had, and it was all through this experience. So when I started to uncover the facts around 1963, that threw me into a loop that I could not find the answer for. And it actually started, Rod. It's your fault. I'll blame you.
I get blamed a lot for things.
I'll thank you, too. I'll thank you also. So I was the editor of the Contender magazine, and our pastor did a series on the seals and the mystery cloud, and I think I probably have the copy of it back here on the shelf. So I thought, well, I'll go out to Believe the Sign used to have some nice cloud pictures. Let me go get a cloud picture off their website for the magazine. Oh my goodness, something happened to your website, Rod.
Yeah.
I get on there and think, oh my goodness, Believe the Sign's been hacked. That was my that was what I thought. So anyways, I quickly found the pictures and moved on, right? Got them into the publication. But there's other things. There's a whole lot of stuff I have left out at this point. But at that point, I'm having some questions. And the two questions I saw raised on your site, they warranted further investigation for me. I guess I'll put it that way. And number one, the cloud was man-made, was one of the things, right? And the other is William Branham wasn't even there that day. And so as I looked into those two things, I came away convinced that the cloud was made by a rocket and not supernatural, right? I mean, the evidence is overwhelming and conclusive. And I even had some of the preachers who preached the cloud supernatural from the platform confirm to me they knew it was made by a rocket too. I mean, it's incredible, Rod. Like, when I would investigate these things, like I went to one message preacher and, and I talked about the rocket, I talked about the cloud, I talked about William Branham not being there, and he just kind of looks at me, yep, and then I get to the end and I say, well, did William Branham just make all this stuff up then? And he goes, yeah, that's pretty well how it is. And I'm flabbergasted, John. I'm flabbergasted, Rod. I mean, like, what in the world? You're the one who told me it was true. I mean, what do you do with that? Yeah. And so I'm like, what in the world?
That's like my, at that point, to interrupt, but that's like my conversation with George Smith when I did all of this research on the municipal bridge vision. And this is going back, there wasn't anything, right? So I was on the websites and I was doing research and encyclopedias of Louisville and Indiana and all this going in. I couldn't find anybody that had died on the bridge. And so finally I phoned up Perry Green. He couldn't confirm anything. I phoned up George Smith. And now by this time my wife is really curious about what I'm digging up, right? Because we're talking about this with my kids every weekend. Because we've got all these questions and we're not getting any answers. And my wife, I'm on the phone, and this is pre-cell phone. So I had my old landline, and I'm on the phone, and my wife is like, she's listening in to what George is saying. And I said, I can't find any evidence for anybody, for the 16 people dying on the bridge. And he says, no, nobody died. And I just like, what? You know this? And you haven't told anybody? Unbelievable.
Yeah. So I found out that Brother Jackson found out that the cloud was fake and Brother Branham wasn't even there back in the early 90s, is what I ended up finding out. Brother Jackson had known it, for years and years and years before he died. And he just quit talking about it, more or less, and kind of found something else to justify things. So that was, so my mental gymnastic I did at that point was, well, they all know the cloud is fake and they still believe the message. So there must still be something valid for me to believe the message. And so this is not enough by itself to make me not believe the message that the cloud's fake, because they already know. And so they still believe. And so that's what I did. I mean, I don't understand why William Branham made all this stuff up. And I don't want to be chaff and let his misdeed blow me away, right? So that's honestly how I looked at it. And I'm gonna stay here. I've still got the revelation of the seals. These are divine revelation from God. We're good. On the Searching for Vindication site, there's an article, the title, quoting William Branham, says, "And their friends is where my sorrow started." And so here, friends, is where my sorrow started. And I still get emotional talking about this, Rod. I can barely, it still breaks my heart that I found these things, But a very good friend of mine who was at church, his father had passed away, and then his mother, and I preached his mother's funeral. And after his mother passed away, he was going through his father's things, and he said, would you like to have any of my father's old books? And he was a preacher. And this book, the Book of Revelation, Clarence Larkin, same edition as what's in William Branham's library, was among the books. And I took it out to... I like pictures, the pictures in here. I thought I could use these to illustrate our...
And he hand drew everyone.
Yeah. So I thought they were really good. And so I pull it out and start looking through it, and about the time you get to page 5, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And and I'm reading this book, and I'm reading all of these things that William Branham said an angel told him. But here they are in a book. And so I'm, that's where my sorrow started. And so as I read through there, a lot of it I could dismiss, but basically 2 of the seals in this book are identical to what we believed, right? And so at that point, I started to have a serious, deep sorrow that I was going to find the other 4 seals one day, and basically discovering that the revelation of the seals was not divine revelation to William Branham from an angel, but rather was something he copied out of books. That's the thing that finally pushed me over the edge, and I didn't fully figure that out until I'd actually left the church. And very sorrowful, very sad, very painful to come to grips with that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, in the message, particularly preachers, constantly say, the reason you left the message is you couldn't live it. The reason you left the message is you just want to go out and party and have a good time. That has nothing to do with it. It's just like, I couldn't believe I was finding these things. I tried to prove the message to be correct, and I failed. And I'm a researcher. That's my background. And when I did research, I had to know beyond a shadow of doubt it was true, because when I gave someone my opinion, they would go out and spend literal hundreds of millions of dollars based on, because I was in professional practice, I was in the tax game worked for one of the largest accounting firms in the world. And when I gave an opinion, I could get sued for that opinion if I wasn't correct. And we had people running hundreds of millions of dollars through all these countries. And it's just like, you had to know you're right. So when I started finding out these things, I didn't tell anybody except my family to say, okay, look, here's what I'm finding. Prove me wrong. I can't believe that I'm finding this.
Yeah, for me, one of the only people I told a lot of the stuff I found to was the man who gave me this book. And I don't know if he'll listen to this or ever see this, because he's still in the message, but if he ever does, I want you to know I am so thankful you gave me this book. You set me free in ways you don't know. And maybe he wonders why I told him the stuff I found. It's because he's the one who gave me the book. And I felt confident to confide in him some of those things. But yeah, it's like you say, Rod, I did not leave the message because I couldn't live it. And here's the truth. I was a message preacher. As far as the rules, I don't know. There's very few people I know who live the message rules better than I did. And I don't think there's a thing. Paul said, I was Pharisee of the Pharisees, of the tribe of Benjamin, circumcised the 3rd day. I was born on the bench.
Yeah.
I was there every service. You could name it all, every rule. I never owned a pair of shorts. You could just go down every rule. And I lived it perfectly. And here's the thing is I still pretty well live the same way. I've lived this way this long, and I don't know, I'm not super, I'm set in my ways, I guess, in a personal sense, so I'm probably never going to personally change, but I live the message better than a whole lot of the people that live on the inside as far as their sets of rules would go. So that's not at all why we left. I left because I found out that William Branham had deceived us about the most important part of the message as far as we believed it. He did not have a supernatural experience in 1963. The Lord did not descend from heaven with a shout. That cloud was a rocket explosion. He wasn't even there, right? And then the revelation that supposedly came from angels, he got out of not only this book, but another book as well. And he just kind of mixed and matched until he got what he presented to us.
Yeah, no, it's very sad. So currently, and we'll get into some more of these specifics, but you're part of the leadership of a church that just started up in Clarksville, Indiana, called the Gospel Church. What was your motivation for starting up a new church?
That brings us to the end of part 2 of our interview with Charles Paisley. We welcome you to come back next month to listen to part 3 of the interview. If you have any questions, please go to the offtheshelf.life website. There is a space for comment and questions at the bottom of each episode. I've asked Charles if he would answer any questions that our listeners might post. Or you can send me an email at rod@offtheshelf.life. Please let us know if there are any issues or questions that you think we should address on the podcast, or someone you think we should consider interviewing. Thank you very much for listening, and remember that God loves you and is not afraid of your questions. Have a great week.